Hello everyone, Andrew Martin here, and welcome to the BCM Game of the Month for June 2013. Because the BCM channel limits me to a 15-minute recording, I'm going to keep the preliminaries brief. And my game this month is between Sergei Karyakin and Hikaru-Nakamura, and it comes from the tournament currently taking place in Norway, where actually it's a rather unusual tournament. The players are actually roaming around Norway, playing at various locations. Quite a novel and entertaining idea. Anyway, Karyakin's white, and he kicked off with e4. And we got a topical variation of the Sicilian Najdorf on the board, where after 5a6, white went bishop g5. I'm very pleased to see that this move is coming more and more back into fashion, moving away from ideas such as the English attack and 6 bishop e2. I've always felt that bishop g5 posed the biggest threat to the Najdorf, but of course when you play it, you've got to know so much. And that acts as a kind of, it puts players off from playing this move. I think that's the only thing one can say. However, Nakamura, he's willing to experiment and play slightly unusual continuations. And so we see the move knight bd7. Again, a move which is coming back very much into topical Najdorf fashion. Well, there are several things that white could do. The normal argument against knight bd7, at least it was back in the days of Spassky and Petrosian when this move was all the rage, was bishop c4. But in this particular game, Karyakin plays queen e2, leading up to castling queenside without delay and planning the idea f4 and then e5. An idea which Nakamura more or less ignores here by playing g6. Well, of course, if black can get away with this move, then this is the most active possible continuation. The bishop will find gainful employment on g7 as long as black can't be blown away with f4 and then e5. Well, evidently Karyakin doesn't seem to think that plan is going to work, so he settles for castling on the queen side. Quiet play by white in this position doesn't really achieve very much and leads to a comfortable game for black, as evidenced by the game Melia versus Canep, Caletta 2013, where white played g3. Obviously, when you go queen e2, you've got to think about what you're going to do with the bishop on f1. But g3 is altogether too quiet, and black just got a very comfortable game in the style of the dragon by first of all putting the queen out on a5, hitting the bishop dropped back, and then the queen goes to c7. I think black's absolutely fine here. Obviously, white's fine too, but black isn't experiencing too much discomfort, and in fact, black went on to win this game. So we go back to Karyakin versus Nakamura with white castling, and black played bishop g7. Well, in the game Yu versus Gordon, Caletta 2013, this variation seemed to be popular in Gibraltar. Black played an easy mix of the Najdorf and dragon by playing e5. After g6, frankly, this move looks misplaced. Black is going to have problems resolving his backward d pawn. And in fact, in the game, after knight b3, h6, bishop e3, b5, despite the fact that black was getting counterplay on the queen side, this move, g6, really does start to look out of place. White safetied with a3, black played rook c8, perhaps threatening rook takes c3, with the usual structure damaging impact on the queen side. White defended against that, black played queen c7, and now king b1, left black without a useful move. He now has to make a decision what he's going to do with this bishop on f8. And there's no good square for it in this position, because after bishop e7, we have bishop takes h6 perhaps. Bishop g7 drops the pawn on d6. So white is better in this position. Therefore, and going back to our game now, black just settled for bishop g7. And white got on with the main idea of this line, f4. Queen to a5, a natural move, and now white played g3. We note that queen a5 covers the square e5. That is the main benefit of this move at this current moment. Although, of course, it gives black queenside counter chances. So g3, a nice move by black now, hitting the bishop. Karyakin surrenders the bishop pair, but in return, white gets momentum. And once again, after bishop g2, he's certainly thinking about the move e5. So Nakamura hastens to exchange off a pair of bishops here and castle. But despite the fact that black's got a nice bishop on g7 and he's managed to exchange off some pieces, I still prefer white after rook he1. It seems to me white's centralisation is quite powerful in this position, and black's got to be a little bit careful about the move knight d5 in certain circumstances, which, if black is forced to take that knight, could condemn black to a rather unpleasant defence. The pawn at e7 would be a real target for the white rooks. Nakamura moves away. Karyakin comes back to hit the queen, and Nakamura plays queen c7, and now comes knight to d5. Now you might have wondered after queen d8 why, if we just drop back a move to knight b3, black didn't play queen d8 right away. Well, the answer is that I think e5 is now a very strong move. White is making good use of his rooks in the centre, and black is really starting to feel pressure in the centre of the board. His pawns are really coming under fire in this position. Queen c7, knight d5, queen d8, blocking the white queen from attacking the b7 pawn in the instance of e5. So Karyakin tries to open up a front on the king side by playing h4. Black played rook c8, white went h5. Nakamura hit the knight, and now a strange moment in the game as white drops back to c3, inviting black to double his pawns. This is a strange moment because I think knight e3 keeps up the pressure. I'm not sure why Karyakin didn't play that move. He must have seen something against it that he didn't like. But certainly the pressure against d6 is starting to really become intense. For instance, if black plays queen e7 here, white just goes rook d2. And the idea of doubling rooks is simple and effective. Going back, white played knight c3. Nakamura doubled the pawns and then brought out his queen to attack c3. Karyakin opened up lines against the black king. Nakamura recaptured. And now after rook takes d6, I think black makes a mistake. He tries the tricky move, knight to e5. Well, just going back, it's clear that rook takes c3 was a pretty important option. Black heads off the threat to his knight by attacking the white queen. I've no doubt that black was wary of a move like queen g4 here, and maybe white's better. But black can defend himself with perhaps queen to f7. The idea being that if white plays rook takes e6, black can play knight f6. So probably white should settle for queen takes e6, and then we get the sequence queen takes, and then rook takes g3. And black has some counterplay in this position. I mean, maybe white's better after, say, rook d1, rook f7, rook e8, check king g7, and now e5. But it's game on. The problem, going back to our game now, with knight e5, is that white has two good retreats for the queen. Queen d1 looks very strong to me. After knight c4, white plays e5. This looks like just a very good position for white. But Karyakin played queen h1, reminding black about his king. Well, the knight came to c4. White pushed forward, blocking out the black queen. The queen came back. And now white played an attacking retreat, rook to d4. h5 was played. And now white brought his queen into the centre. Karyakin obviously felt that this centralisation plan was much more effective than taking on h6 previously. Black protected the knight. White doubled up, reaching a position of excellent coordination, keeping black under pressure. And black defended the 7th rank by going rook c7. And now comes what is, to all intents and purposes, the decisive move here. White played the excellent move, knight c5, forcing a penetration on the 7th rank. And this is a really awkward move for white to meet. The problem is that when black takes this knight, and I don't think there's any other real move. I mean, black can play a move like, let's say, knight b6 here, but now we have knight takes e6, that's the point, and rook d6, when black's kingside is falling apart. So rook takes c5 was played, going back to the game. White went in with rook d7, and black played rook c7, reluctantly giving up the queen. And the point of it is that when black plays queen to e8, keeping an eye on the g-pawn, white has queen to b7. Rook f7, takes, rook d8 check, king g7 and rook d7. That's the problem. Black can't defend his 7th rank. So rook c7, and now we reach a kind of curious theoretical endgame by force here. And by the way, king takes f7's forced to protect the pawn, where white manages to swap off all the pieces, and we reach a queen versus 2 pieces endgame. Very interesting situation. But first of all, white's got to force that situation. So he opens up the h-file, brings his rook over, king g7, queen g2, and now black is forced to swap the rooks because of white's mating threats. Off come the rooks, queen takes g4, black plays rook h7, threatening mate, white defends himself, rook f7, and now the queen comes into d4. The problem is the black pieces are a bit scattered in this position, and it's difficult to coordinate them. The rook and knight in general don't work too well against the queen in this type of position. So white can win this. It takes some time, but Karyakin's very methodical. First of all, white moves in, targets the black king. The problem is black's got to keep all his pieces tightly together here to avoid losing one of them to a check. The queen is very powerful in a situation like this. In the game, Nakamura took on g5, and we now see the power of the queen, for instance, after rook e7. As after queen h6 check, black is actually losing something. If he goes king f5, he loses to queen f6 check, picking off the rook. And if he goes king f7, queen f6 check, this time picks off the knight. So Nakamura played king takes g5. Queen came into e6. You can see how difficult it's becoming now to keep the black pieces tightly knit together. And white's next task in this endgame really is to create a passed pawn on the queen side. This is going to take some time, but black's position is so difficult to handle to keep everything together that in the end Karyakin manages to do this. Now in this particular position, obviously white's threatening queen takes knight, so a check is important. Another example of how it's difficult for black to keep it together is if he goes knight takes c2. Then we go queen g7 check, king f4, queen g3 check, king f5, and now the fork, queen d3 check. And note that going back, if black plays king f5, then the white queen skewers the king and knight with queen h7 check. So knight g4 check, king f3, rook f5, king e2, rook e5 check. No need for white to rush. The king just leisurely, in its own leisurely way, comes across to the queen side. The critical moment is arising here. King f4, queen h4, pinning, rook e5, trying to keep it all together. Here comes the critical moment. White plays c4, creating this important passed pawn on the queen side. And the first fine point of this move is that if black takes, we go queen h3 check, queen f1 check, and then queen takes c4. Okay, it's going to take some time, but you can see the passed pawns are going to win. So back at the game now, knight e3, queen f6 check. This really is the last phase of this game. King d4, and after queen d6 check, black resigned. Well, it's very, very hard to see a move in this position. Obviously, king takes c4 loses the rook. If king e4, we have queen d3 check, king f4, and now c takes b5, after which white has 3 passed pawns. So a very interesting struggle, and one of the most interesting parts of that game was the phase where, if you remember, white had this nice centralised position. You'd think that black with his bishop and typical Sicilian formation would be okay, but that turned out not to be the case.